All right, another picture of the camera, Kodak's camera, and the insert there. All right, so what do we do with all these cameras? Now we got cameras. Now photography is in the everyday person's hand. We can take this little camera and we can go anywhere we want to go and take pictures and bring back pictures and show people of faraway places, of interesting things that we saw. So we have these photographers coming out. So one of the first, as we talked about in the camera obscura, the daguerreotype, the first interest in photography was portraits. People wanted their portrait taken so that when they died, you could show your grandchildren, who you were, who you look like, tell a story about this person. It was a reminder. So they were memories, right? Pretty much memories. So that was really the first drive of photography. As you can see with some of the early images from the Kodak camera, those were a lot of people shots, not a lot of landscape shots, but a lot of people shots. Okay. Processes were limited, needs lots of light, slow emulsions, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So portraits kind of where it started. And, this idea of your photos being like the most important thing. If your house is burning down, you got to grab one thing and run out. What do you say? Well, now it's hard drives, but it used to be family albums. The pioneers did this. Pioneers did this photography. They take pictures of their family. They put the pictures on a horse-drawn carriage and they take off. Right, the covered wagon. They take off across the United States. With them were pictures, pots and pans and stuff like that, clothes, but pictures of where they were from. Really, really important piece. There's also this idea of portrait photography began this idea of the calling card. I don't know if you ever heard of that. The carte de visite, or the calling card. So having your portrait on a small piece of paper was like a little reminder to people. So if I went to my friend's house on a Sunday for some tea, right, a beer, I'd knock on the door, they'd answer the door, they'd say hello, and I'd hand them, they know who I am, but I'd hand them my calling card. They'd put my card in a bowl by the door, we'd go have our tea, blah, blah, I'd leave. Every once in a while, they would sit down with this bowl filled with calling cards and remember who was there to visit. See, remember what they looked like, remember what you talked about. So it was this, sort of connection to memories, both recent and long ago, that photography first became incredibly important and really started spreading its use. Travel was another big one. Bringing images home from far away. Henry Jackson, Carleton Watkins, Jackson Yellowstone, Watkins Yosemite. These were the first photographers that were out with these crazy cameras, these crazy big, huge cameras, taking pictures of these beautiful sites, beautiful wilderness areas. They brought them back, and because of those photos that got introduced into Congress, lands were set aside to be national parks because they were so beautiful. So our forefathers had the insight to protect places like Yellowstone and protect places like Yosemite as something that we can appreciate over and over again, generation after generation, because of these pioneer photographers, Henry Jackson and Carleton Watkins. Sometimes you confuse Ansel Adams with, Yosemite, but he was way after, right? Carleton Watkins, he was the first guy out there on horseback, shooting landscapes. That was 1860-ish when that happened. So Civil War. Now we have photography, and these were still wet collodion cameras. They still weren't the dry plate cameras. So they were still difficult in the field. Coat the glass, let it dry partway, take a picture, process it right away. Okay, so Sullivan and Matthew Brady were two photographers that were known, let's say, for photographing the Civil War, 1863-ish. But these weren't journalistic pictures. They weren't on the embedded troops on the firing line with the other, soldiers taking photographs. They would be far, far away. The battle would take place. They would come with their horse and their tent and all their gear, and they'd take pictures of the result or the aftermath. And it got so far as, they had a lot of journalistic license where they could take the bodies and repose them a little bit or redress them a little bit or make the image look a little better than it did. But, really, you were still getting the horror of war, okay, and being able to bring that back to the people that weren't able to see that or were sort of, kind of shielding their eyes from such things going on. So they were able to do that sort of documentary kind of photography. That idea of telling a story, that idea of showing us news, something that we should know about, right? So we have this journey, we have portraits, we have this travel, we have this kind of journalism or reporting kind of photography, and then we have this area of photography that was kind of experimental and pushing the limits of photography in a lot of different directions. You may have seen this demonstration. It's presented in many, many, many different ways. But basically, as film got faster, lenses got faster, we could push the envelope just a little bit more. So legend has it that Muybridge and Leland Stanford, here from Stanford, were sitting down having a scotch, smoking a cigar, and they were both big horse people. And one of them said, "Hey, when a horse is running, there's one point in the gate where there's nothing touching the ground." And the other one said, "Oh, that's baloney. If it was, they'd fall." And so I forgot which one said which, but Muybridge said, "Okay, I'll prove it to you." And so he set up a whole row of cameras with little strings on them. And as the horse ran by the camera, it broke the string. When the string broke, a picture was taken. So here we have this basic idea of a sequential series of photographs showing the gait of a horse running at full speed. And in fact, there are several points in the gait where there's nothing touching the ground, but the forward momentum clearly is pushing the horse forward, and he's not falling down. And then on comes a whole host of photographers that are about social change. They're about photography as a document. They're about telling truths, journalistic integrity, showing people those things that were kept away from us. Right? So the idea that photography could be this way of communicating. In some cases, great joy, but in some cases, some pretty horrible conditions. Louis Hines was one of these famous photographers that did a lot of this kind of exploration sort of photography as a kind of a social document or social change. Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans also, during the Depression, were doing photography. These were roll film cameras, more portable. And they were asked by the Farm Security Administration to kind of go out and document, this depression and what's going on, and give us some hope that America can come out of this. We're going to survive. Let's bring some pictures back, everybody else, and letting them know that we're on our way to recovery. Well, unfortunately, during their this is about 1930-ish, during their work as a documentary photographer, it led them to a lot of pictures that weren't quite as pretty, maybe, as the government wanted. So they fired them. So that was a good gig they had for a while, but because they were telling the truth, they were fired. But continued on with this sort of a documentary kind of style and thinking about the photography as actually creating some change in the world. So as we start down this road of influential photographers, clearly Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Muybridge, Watkins, and so on, have all contributed in really, really super significant ways. The man who probably single-handedly took photography from pictorial or from a dismissed form of art, meaning just thinking about it as a documentary piece. He took photography and elevated it to the art community. So here we have our first play on photography being a legitimized art form. And there was a lot of argument going on because you pointed the camera at a scene and took it. You didn't really create anything. But Stieglitz believed that no, that wasn't true. It's how you point it, where you point it, when you take the picture. There were a lot of pieces of photography, right, that then could sort of become art. And I think we still struggle with when is a photograph art, when is it not. We've talked about that. We will talk about that. It's kind of an ongoing conversation. Stieglitz was really connected into the art scene in New York. Had a gallery, produced a magazine about photography. Just talked about the high-end, artistic kind of photographic pursuits. He was a photographer also, but really, what he was known for is elevating photography into that world of fine art. So by putting in his gallery and talking about it and really showing it off. So that probably was his claim. Although we do have some of his photographs, early photographs that were taken, more a little bit kind of bridging the documentary to the sort of compositionally artistic side slightly. So we're going to breeze through a bunch of photographers here. This isn't by any means end all be all of any photographer who's made a contribution to photography. There are thousands more that I know about and another 1,000 more that I've never heard of that have been incredible contributors to photography. These are just happen to be people that I've stumbled upon, whether early in my career as a photographer or lately, that I thought were sort of interesting in the work that they do. It interests me. It may not interest you. But again, get a sort of a cross-section of a lot of photographers. Edward Weston, I don't know if you've been down to Point Lobos in Monterey, but there's a place called Weston Beach. And that was named after Edward Weston. He'd go down there and photograph a lot. Probably has most known for his head-down nude right here, Karis. Also this pepper. They made a big deal about this pepper being, some sort of on his way to doing nude photography or something. But as the story goes, it's just a pepper in a steel funnel. And then he ate it when he was done, so it wasn't really a big deal. Other than that's probably one of the most sought after images altogether. So he did a lot of commercial work. He had a studio in LA. He spent a lot of time with Rivera in Mexico with a woman named Mandati. Did a lot of photography down there. Came back up here to the Monterey Bay Area and was one of these California-based Monterey photographers who hung out with Ansel Adams and the like, and kind of took this lead from Stieglitz and started creating photographs that weren't just landscapes, but had this sort of artistic, compositional, kind of taking photography to that next level, the fine art level, or a different level. Man Ray, maybe not solely a photographer, but did a lot of photography. I mean, he was a kind of contentious guy. Anybody make a photogram? Maybe in a high school photo class. He sort of invented the process of a rayogram. Basically, this is taking a photographic piece of paper, laying it down in a dark room, putting some objects that won't transmit light or opaque on the paper, and then turning on the lights and turning them off, and then getting a negative impression of that image. His photography was quick, efficient. He'd just make the pictures that came to him. He didn't struggle over it. It wasn't a big deal. He didn't make thousands of images. What he saw, he felt, he photographed, he moved on. Did a lot of painting, did a lot of more conceptual art. So kind of a mixed media sort of artist. But photography was kind of a large piece of his. Some more rayograms. And there's, a repeat of some of the images, but some new ones. So Paul Strand probably was the first kind of documentary, street photographer, maybe. He shot buildings, he shot people. He there's a whole bunch of photographers now that are, kind of doing this real photography, not what is around you, what's present. Doesn't have to be terribly interesting, but it is what it is. Led by a group of, well, what's his name? It's not, Eggleston. Led by Eggleston, who did that a lot. And there's a bunch of other photographers doing that. So this is probably the father of that sort of photography. So had some interesting kind of images in more of a street photography kind of setting. Here you can kind of see. Of course, the cameras were bigger, more bulky, and things like that. So a little more difficult to be quick and anonymous in that kind of world. I don't know what that one's doing in there. It needs to go away. Dorothea Lange. So again, right, part of the early documentary photographer. Photographed the Depression, lots of images. She's from Berkeley, but took off to photograph these different these different people in these different situations as regarding the Depression. So Alfred Eisenstedt, he was kind of this F8 and be there. Set your camera up. Don't worry about it. Be at the right place at the right time. Cameras are getting a little bit smaller by now. They're getting a little bit more portable. Film speeds are faster. You can move a little bit more anonymously through the crowd. But the position. What's your point of view? And don't get too caught up in all the other pieces. Get that point of view. Show us something unique. I thought this was an interesting example, right, of a bunch of kids watching a marionette show, but instead of photographing behind the kids seeing the marionette show, he chose to stand in front, right, and photograph all these beautiful, happy faces. Well, most of them are happy, I guess, except those two girls on the bottom right. So this is a way to really change that perspective and get a different sort of concept of what the picture is all about. Probably his most famous picture, this one, and this is a classic example of F8 and be there. Set your camera up, set the exposure up, set the focus up, and when that moment happens, grab it. We've been through a lot of critiques up to this point, and if you would give me this photograph as a example of to fill one of the assignments, I would probably make a comment about the sailor getting half cut off right here and this guy getting partially cut off right here. Why don't you crop in a little bit? Why don't we see more? Blah blah blah. But at some point it's really about the image. Do you really see that? Is it a frame? Right? Does it push everything back to the sailor in the center? It may, but it's not. The first thing about this image is the moment. Everything else is secondary. So you did a lot of other commercial kind of work with a very graphic component. A little bit of documentary.